Welcome to Book and Lounge. I'm your host, Jacqueline. I'm really excited because today we have a fantastic guest with us, Desmond Hall. Desmond is a Jamaican-born author who made quite a splash with his debut YA novel, Your Corner Dog. It was named one of Bank Street's best YA novels of 2022. And if you haven't read it yet, you're in for a treat. His writing is packed with suspense, emotion, and some really thought-provoking social commentary. It's not really surprising because he's had quite an incredible journey himself. He moved from Jamaica to New York and has done pretty much everything from teaching high school biology and English in Brooklyn to counseling teenage ex-cons after they got let out of Rikers Island. He's even been Spike Lee's creative director at Spike DDB. Plus, he has judged some big awards like the One Show and the American Advertising Awards. And that's not all. Variety magazine named him one of their top 50 creatives to watch. Amazing, right? So today Katrina and I are going to chat to Desmond about his new book, Better Must Come, which is coming out next month. We'll discuss how he got into writing, how he blends all those intense emotions and real-life issues into his stories, and if we're lucky, we may even get a peek into what he's currently working on. Desmond, welcome to Book and Lounge.
Thank you. Thank you both.
So let's start off with some introductions. I'm Jacqueline and I run the Afro-Caribbean Book Club, and we have a podcast that goes along the book club. So sometimes it's just us talking about books that we've read, and then sometimes it's us talking to interesting authors like yourself. So we've been doing the podcast for about 2 years, but the book club itself has been running over 10 years now.
Yes, well, my name's Katrina. I've been a member of the book club kind of on and off, but pretty much since its early days, I guess, for a long time anyway. But I've had gaps when I've not been in this country and before we invented Zoom and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so I guess I don't have as an exciting life as other people, so I'm usually available for the podcasts.
So you must be a writer then.
No, I'm not a writer. I'm much more a reader than a writer.
But that's interesting because when you read, you get to go to all those places in your head.
Exactly.
We writers, we stick in one place for long periods of time alone with our characters, and we're stuck.
But it's a skill though. I mean, like, being able to create characters from nothing.
Yeah, but they say writing is the loneliest business you can have. Friends don't really understand when you tell them, I can't see you, I have to write, because they tend to think you can write at any single time when you're just not with them. But it's, not the case. You have to be fairly regimented and hard with yourself and difficult with, friends and family and acquaintances alike, because it is a job.
Mm-hmm. And so then do you yourself, do you have to set yourself time and say, this is my writing time, I'm not going to do anything else within that time?
Yeah, all my time is writing time. I get, one daughter's off to college, the other one's in high school. I help her get going in the morning, then I write. Then my day is like pretty mundane. I take care of house chores, I cook, and then I write. And then I make dinner and I write. And then after dinner, I write. So I just keep going.
Do you always find you can write, or do you find yourself chewing the end of the pen? I mean,
So
I
chewing
don't think I'd.
so chewing into the pen is writing, I think. I think it's it's like baseball. It's in the hips. Just keep the hips on the chair, and while you keep thinking, you're writing. And I so many times, like I've been working on this project, a different one right now, and I've been going back and forth about what it will mean if I allow someone to give in to their own whims for the benefit of humankind. And I sit for hours, and I've been sitting for hours trying to decide, how will this affect the reader? You just sort of lay it out there and let the reader decide. But I want to put something out there that I think is really valuable for them to chew on. And then I try, given that I'm an old school teacher, I try to like not make it, pedantic so that they can come to the answer themselves. But so I think many times when we write, we're sitting and thinking and chewing on said pencil, regardless of its taste.
Because I hear quite a few writers saying that they write for themselves. So do you, in that case, write for the reader rather than for yourself?
Yeah, I don't believe in this thing because, if you're gonna go write for yourself, why do you want to publish? Why don't you just write your memoirs and then read them to yourself from time to time? I I want people to have an experience and a ride. And I think my two sort of areas that I'm realizing are my expertise are thriller and then budding relationships in times of great distress. And what I want to do with those, given that the definition of a thriller is that you're turning the pages quickly, but I want people's wrists to hurt when they turn those pages. So I use a lot of techniques to make sure that they have that experience. Like I keep the chapters short. Sometimes I chop off the ending to make the reader try to fill out what is going to happen next. And then also I layer in always having the character's intentions, the obstacle, and then the turn, as a minimum in each chapter. So that way, if not in each scene, to keep the ball going. And then in this, sort of budding relationship thing, I think it's really interesting when you think about how kids are today. I'm reading all of these surveys where, they're not so interested in sex. Am I allowed to say sex on your podcast?
Yeah, yes, you can.
Yeah, sex,
Definitely.
sex, sex. So yeah, so they're not so interested in that. And then they have this disbelief in love. And then, with the older generation, that of course that marriage is on the downswing. And this is an interesting time, right? With this lack of belief. But I think it has a lot to do, of course, with our circumstances, our global circumstances right now. And that sort of belief and feel, it seems that like my characters are experiencing this as well. Young teenagers thinking about, can I have this relationship? Do I want to have this risk? And when you think of in the way things are now with all these substitutes, it's sort of like before, when you would have a relationship, before meaning my time, before when you have a relationship, it's sort of a risk, right? You're going to take this chance because it's dangerous, Then so you're going to take this risk and get in this relationship. But now you have these substitutes with social media and all these other engagements where people, pornography, which is like ridiculously accessible. In my time, it used to be maybe on public television on one of the classic shows, you could see like a quarter of the screen and see part of someone's body. But now it's, readily available and children are consuming it like crazy. And so I think, this sort of substitution is interesting, and I write about it, but with a sort of again a global sense, as well as like the circumstances that they encounter in the stories I write.
Your next book is about to be published. Better soon come?
Yeah, man, it's better must come.
Oh, better, yes, better must come. And sorry, I got the title wrong. And it is your second novel.
It is. It is. The first one was Your Corner Dark,
Uh-huh.
which was means back home being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And Better Must Come. And it's interesting, like I got both titles from, family back home because I'd call and I'd say, we can't come up with the right thing. And they're like, well, what do you want to talk about? So I'm like, well, it's like, it's a hard time and a tough place. So they're like, oh, you kind of dark, man. And then with this one, the original title for Better Must Come was Barrel Girl because it's, based on or inspired by the sociologist term of barrel children. And I called back home and I said, well, I don't know how to interpret this one because my editor has challenged me to come up with something better. And I love my editor, by the way. And so they said, there was a song back in the day called "Better Must Come," and it was about the difficult times in Jamaica back then in the 70s, which was huge turmoil. And the song was not just popular, but it was also taken up by one of the political parties, which shall be nameless, remain nameless, and the idea that better will happen, of course. And certainly right now, given the circumstances Jamaica is once again in, better must come.
Obviously, it is a young adult book, but were you aiming it at any sort of specific group, any
Yeah,
target
so
audience, so to speak?
yeah. So first of all, the large part of the young adult market, I used to be in advertising, right? So I know I care about these things because it's just in my blood. But a large part of the market is adults. They enjoy reading the young adult novels. So that I find that interesting, right? And then, of course, the young adults themselves, I really, really like to give agency to young people. And again, being an old time school teacher, I used to do it back in Brooklyn where we had the highest homicide rate in the country at the time. And one thing kids need, on top of education, is belief and hope and backing them up with enthusiasm and belief, again, that they can make it. So when I think about Better Must Come, my lead character, Deja, she is given an agency to not just take care of her family, but to also exercise her own rights across the island. Generally, young women in Jamaica aren't usually given. And I think given the sort of circumstances of what she goes through, I think it becomes universal. She has this opportunity to help her family. And many times, I think when you think about teenagers, this idea that I could do something for my family, right? They still always want to be, I'm so independent, I'm about myself and all of this. But at the same time, they're always thinking about pleasing the family, right? In some way or form. And so Deja has this opportunity to take on a very perilous task to not just help her mother, but her little brother and sister as well. And of course, when you take on these chances, so to speak, there are consequences. And she suffers through many consequences because I believe, in order to show true character, especially in the genre I write in, you have to show it through action because I think talk is cheap. I think many times you can write many different ways of telling what the character is feeling and all of that. But I think you want to, it's the classic thing of show, don't tell. But I think it's even a higher level of that, especially again in the thriller genre, is to show through action, right? And the choices made under the pressure to really show who someone is, right? Because many times, people can fudge it and do this and that, but when it comes down to the physicality of the situation, then the reader is there and you see, well, they made this choice and they're jumping in. They must really believe in it. Their whole heart is there. So that's kind of the way I feel about that.
You mentioned that you were in advertising prior to starting writing, but I
Don't
was
hold it against me.
I wasn't. I was because I also read somewhere that you're a scriptwriter. So I
Hmm.
wanted to try and understand what the writing experience is like writing this book compared to writing your first book and also comparing to writing scripts.
Boy, you're complicated, eh? So yeah, yeah. So whew, so I wrote an independent feature way back when in the time of independent films when it was I think a lot easier to go from 0 to 100 with those types of films. And it was a comedy, a dramatic comedy about race relations in America. And it was a time when things weren't as completely fraught as they are right now. And in writing that, when you get down to it, there's a lot of, let's see, there's a lot of dependence on the actor to deliver the emotionality of what you write on the page. And as a screenwriter, if you write a lot of what the character is supposed to think and feel, often the studio heads or the readers for the studio heads will discard the manuscript, the screenplay right away. Because again, the more bare you keep it, the more the actor gets to fill in, and the director gets to sort of fill in their viewpoint, their sort of direction that they want to take the work in. And, so when I did A Day in Black and White, which HBO bought back in the day, it was when I wrote the screenplay, I didn't even give the characters names. It was black man, white woman, white man, and young white man, old black man. And I really kept it that way to keep the focus on the race. But I think when I look at Your Corner Dark, my first book, or Better Must Come, the second one coming out, that is more, you have to do a lot more, again, with the sort of action and showing the character's intentions on the page. Whereas with the screenwriting, that's a major no-no. You'll be called an amateur and your screenplay will not get read or not get green lit or even an option. But in the literary world, when you show this action, you really are getting more in depth into the character. And I think this is interesting also to say. I think one of the major differences is in between script writing, as you say, or we call it screenplay writing, and literature here, is that the character's flaw is generally put down on the page somewhere in literature, right? You understand this like heinous event that the character has not gotten over yet, and that is, gives the novel writing more depth than the film writing. Again, that many times within the film world, that certain look that someone gives to another it carries everything. Here's mine. Huh? See what I mean? Yeah. And again, in the world of novel writing, you have to really layer those emotions with, the action, and you set it up. I really believe in lots of setups and payoffs. And my editor, Caitlin DeLuey, and we worked on over 30 different setups and payoffs in Better Must Come. One of them I'll mention quickly without giving a spoiler away is there's a stone called pyrite, right? It's called fool's gold. And kids often and it's a classic little kid thing. They pick it up, I found gold, me have gold. And, and then, so one of the other characters and a quote unquote gangster who is actually educated and turned to this life because, the Jamaican unemployment for youth is bubbling around 50%, if not higher, right now. And he turned to this life, but he's actually quite educated. And many times you'll talk to people in the police force, and they'll tell you the last thing you want is an educated criminal. But anyway, so back to the pyrite in the setup. He, we take this stone and we take this educational moment where the gangster is teaching these little kids about how to understand geology, to see that this stone is actually not gold and why it's not. And that's like cool and it's really good for the character. But here's, I think, the area where it gets even better. Later on, this stone turns a scene to save someone's life. Right? I can't give much more away because I don't want to spoil it. But I think that's key, right? When you find these really interesting setups don't let them go. Don't let's just to keep that not just in the back of your mind. Maybe if you have like a little pad and paper on the side, jot it down on the side and return to it and think about how can I take this emotional scene that's an emotional, nice thing where it could have violins, but then play it later on where it has synth, and it's really exciting and thrilling. And the writer, I mean, the reader's, sort of workflow, if you will, is retroactive in many ways, right? So if you're reading something on page 140, and like, let's say it's that stone reappearing again, that pyrite, and you go back, your mind will go boom and zoom all the way back to page 70, where the stone initially was introduced and turned that scene. And you're like, oh, that's good. So it's come back to you. And you're like, I understand why that was done now. And you get this sort of great feeling. Some writers call it an Easter egg. But, I love that idea of setups and payoffs. And Caitlin, my editor, and I worked really hard on like seeding a bunch of those in the manuscript.
How much do you and Caitlin go back on a draft before it's then finalized?
Caitlin is amazing. Like, yo, man, I need to come up with great words for this. She is, okay, I'll say it this way. She completes me. It's really amazing. I think many times, because you had mentioned earlier when I wrote the independent movie, A Day in Black and White, I knew I needed another voice. It wasn't a complete manuscript. And though, the reviews were good and all of that, that was one of the things they said. The critics knew that it wasn't complete. And I needed someone else and I needed more time. But the money I had gotten and raised, I needed to spend at that time, and I didn't have that time to go there. And I felt many times when I wrote that I am not this complete entity, right? And I wonder about this, I got to think it's a myth, the myth of this lone rider in the log cabin going away and coming back with this complete, perfect manuscript from the mountaintop. I mean, I think there are just many voices and many people along the way. Having that writing community that not just keeps you going, but also says, hey, why don't you use that scene you set up on page 30? Hey, why does the character fall in love? Why don't they fight the love a little bit longer? That way it's more dramatic. All these things that are said along the way contribute to the process. And you really need that writing community to get it done. And I get the sort of fiction of it, of the fully fleshed writer that can do all this by themselves. But I don't see a lot of them. And I know a lot of really good writers, but I don't see them that way. And when I think of Caitlin, I'm just really glad I have someone like that on my side that will be cruel, cruel in the nicest way. She's not one of these off-putting people. And because of the pandemic, we've never physically met, but I really like her, digitally. And, having that person that completes you is just, it's an amazing relationship, one that rivals others.
I was about to ask what your wife thinks about the fact that Caitlin
Come on, you
completes
want me to catch a divorce, eh? I got you, I try for the... No comment.
All right. So, did you have a copy of the book with you?
Hold on. Okay. So here's the first one. Great cover, love, great designer. And then I think really beautiful cover. I am very beholden to the designer. It's just beautiful.
So I was going to ask if you could maybe read a paragraph also from Better Must Come, and then Katrina will then proceed to ask a few more questions about the book itself.
Oh, you didn't prepare me for my speaking voice.
You mean Alex did not tell you?
You'll manage. I'm sure you're going to manage fine.
Now, what to read? Ah, Jesus. So I think it's interesting, there's also a time component. We were talking about thrillers before, and there's a day and time to each chapter. And let me tell you, given my tendency to be dyslexic, I'm on that dyslexic scale. It was huge to have an editor who is not dyslexic and who would be on me, because the first quarter of the book is told out of sequence. And in order to do that with time, date, and time is really, really tough. You think of like Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, where the events happen days and weeks before each other. It's very difficult, and especially for someone like me. So this is the second chapter, which is the early inciting incident, where a lot gets put into play. And as for non-writers out there, the inciting incident is the event that the changes the character's life, and they have to spend the entire book trying to solve this problem. And so here we go. 3/4 of a mile away, skies blooming violet over the distant mountains shrouded in green, she reached one of her favorite fishing spots, close to a shoreline crowded with sea grape trees, mahos, and red mangroves. Mr. Wallace's dinged-up boat was only named Gregor because there was a dent where the Mac in the brand name McGregor had been scraped away, probably on a bad parking job, but hey, at least she made it this far. The parrotfish were always biting here, and she could usually get 1 or 2 bars on her phone in case something happened with her sibs. And Straylene needed to shout. Deja cast out her line. Yesterday morning, she'd caught 3 parrotfish and 1 fat snapper, made $35 selling them to tourists. For American cash, of course. Her mother always said to get American money, the Jamaican dollar hemorrhaged value. Her cell phone buzzed. She recognized the 347 area code. It was from Brooklyn, her mom. But it wasn't her number. Deja jammed her fishing pole into a rickety holder and answered straight away. Hello! Hi, Deja. It was Mom. What a relief. Hold on a second. Deja fished out her 2 SIM cards. Which one was the international one again? She needed to have Mom call back so she could switch the cards. No need to pay crazy rates. Mummy, sorry, I'm on a boat and just getting the SIM card ready. Deja, something happened. The hollowness of her mother's voice resonated from some more than 1,500 miles away. One of the SIM cards slipped out of Deja's hand and fell onto the deck of the ship. Mom, you okay? The pause was terrifying. Mummy! Was she there? Drop calls were a way of life in Jamaica. But then her mother sniffled. Mom, can you hear me? What's wrong? Deja, Deja, baby, I've been robbed. Wait, what? What now? What? Are you all right? Now don't feel no way about it. I'm okay. Her mother had a teacher's voice, a tone that made you think you were the only one in the world, but that voice was gone. In its place was the sound of someone else, a frazzled person, asking you for directions. I'm in the hospital, but I'm okay. Hospital? Oh my God, what happened, mommy? Steady yourself, baby, steady. I'll be fine. I was on the street and some man, Deja's stomach clenched, and the rest of her body followed. Some man. Did what, mommy? Did what? Listen, Deja, I am fine. Whenever anyone told you over and over that they were fine, it usually meant that they were not fine. It's mostly I lost my partner money. Her mother blurted out. He took everything. Deja nearly snapped her phone in half. Everything? You had all the partner money on you? That damn money club. Deja hated it. Carrying around other people's cash, the dumbest idea she ever heard. Her mom loved it though, said financially distressed people like them needed to make partnerships where each person contributed a specific amount every 2 weeks or so. Then you took turns withdrawing the bulk of the money. from the partnership to meet big payments when they came due. Even millionaires would go bankrupt if they couldn't raise enough cash to meet certain payments at specific times. Her mother had insisted. Deja had scoffed at that whole old school ridiculousness anyway. ATMs, people, ATMs. How much was it, mommy? All of the money? And are you sure you're all right? Deja, here's why I'm telling you this. There won't be any barrel coming, any money for school fees. You understand me? Damn, damn. Of course, no money equals no barrel, but still. Yes, but mom, are you okay? Don't worry about me, her mother insisted, but her voice, flat, so flat, said the opposite. How could she even suggest that? That was about as impossible could be. Tell me now, you sure you're okay? Deja pressed. Listen, Donovan's ADHD meds are covered for another 6 months, so that's okay for now. Her mother was clearly avoiding the question, but the mortgage is coming up. I'll figure out something soon. She sounded like she'd been hiking up a mountain, reaching for breath. Kalicia's school fees are due, but you can talk to the administrator, ask her for an extension. I talked to her already. Oh, good. That's one less thing for me to worry about. Crap. Now Deidre couldn't tell her the rest. Now stop there.
Over to you, Katrina.
Yeah, man, a trouble, worries and trouble.
Yes, indeed. With all those bills coming in. So I wanted to ask you about the character of the pastor, Pastor Powell or Chops.
Yes.
And I was just curious to think, is it, are there real people who've inspired that character, who's changed from, the gangs to the church, but he's still involving himself in this other world, really, even though trying to be on the side of the authorities, apparently. I just wondered if there's real people who've got that kind of role.
Well, there's family who've gone into the other side of the law, let's so to speak, and who are doing good in the community, who have reformed themselves. And I find that to be amazing. And I think of it a lot like the Bible story of Saul, becoming Paul. Is the chief persecutor, and then the event on the road changes who he is. And when I speak to this uncle who has reformed himself, it wasn't one of these like long term thinking things where as far as he tells me anyway, it wasn't this kind of thing where it's like, let me go on a 12-step program or something and try to recover. It just becomes one day it's like, I can't do this anymore. And that sort of jives with me as far as like things I've heard from other folks, where you just get to a point and it's like, you know what, this is wrong and can't do it anymore. And then I think it's also interesting. There's in the I read the Gleaner and the every almost every day, and there is a priest who is reformed, uh, let's say criminal in Kingston, and he's an interesting character as well. Yeah, so I mean, and also I think taking it a little bit further, Chops is undercover priest,
Yes,
and
exactly.
I'd like to take credit for that phrase, but that's Caitlin, and I think it's great. It can have a spin-off, the Chops episode, the Chops book. Yeah, but I think he's a really special character, and
Yes, definitely.
I think there's also this thing. I don't know what your religions are, but there's an underpinning, an anchoring, and then in contrast with an untethering with the belief in the best of us, right? I will call it spirituality, and I find that the economic woes in Jamaica and many places around the world are are often a cause of this untethering from a belief in trying to find at least the best in us, and a movement away from spirituality that I think is incredibly dangerous. Because when you begin to get to this sort of existential way of thinking about the world, and you think, well, what we are terminal carbon units, right? And our time is limited. And when you really begin to feel that, and then you feel no sense of spirituality, and I'm not saying it in the sense that, well, there's a life waiting for us after death. I'm talking about trying to live day to day in a good way, a said golden rule, or a belief that, what, we're all on this ride, so it can at least be a little bit good to each other. And that is a huge pain. Like I was saying earlier, again, as an old school teacher, I try to get this stuff in there, but again, you can't make it direct because kids will go, ah. So you try to seed it under there. So maybe they get it, maybe they don't get it. But the idea of what Chops has gone through and the way he does it through his action and decisions, and again, showing things through actions versus an action under pressure, is like really the thing. And when you get to that place, then I think, people have a chance to fill in the blank themselves and to feel that action as opposed to being told what to think.
Just to follow on from that, I think I like Hammer. I'm still on the fence. I'm not sure whether he's actually fully reformed, or he's just using the priest, well, the church as a cover, but he's really still in the posse. So I think when I got to the end, I still wasn't sure.
Yeah, good. Yeah,
Playing both sides.
playing both sides.
Playing both sides. And God as well.
Hey, it's not for me to say what Chops is feeling. Uno feel that. But let me
He's a
ask.
very good it's a very good character, isn't it? Because, like you said, Jackie, for a long time in the book, I couldn't work out what side he was really on and what was going on. You could tell, obviously, there's something going on underneath the official sort of pastor role, but quite which way he was playing it, I was uncertain. And like you say, well, maybe there's more to it even than that. It's a good character.
Yeah. So the other thing that struck me was the names, and especially the nicknames. So you had Chops, Hammer, Blue Moon. Is it Blue Moon? Blood Moon?
Blood
And I just,
Moon.
yes. So I just think, how did you come up with the nicknames? And which of the characters did you enjoy writing the most, and why?
So first, yeah, I believe in lots of research. And so I've gone through, there's actually, if you Google, there's a lexicon of Jamaican gangster name. Real thing. But again, you don't want to be too real and put that name with the certain location, if you know what I mean. So I'd go and I look up all these names of actual people in the criminal world, and I get my inspiration from that. And I think it's important because many times people only know the people through those nicknames. Like many times someone might be called Winston Marshall, but people will go, "Who that? Who named that?" And it's like, "Oh, you mean Blood Moon? Yeah, man, we know him." Why you never said so the first time? Yeah. So I think it's like really important, and I think it's good for the feel of the story also for people to be known that way. And I think also in Jamaica, many people are also, even outside of the criminal world, are known by their nickname. Just more so, I think, in the criminal world. And which character did I like writing the most? You're cruel, you're wicked, man. I love all my characters. You're probably wow. So it's a tie, okay? It's Deja because life is not often, well, no, I should say it this way. Agency is not often provided to a young woman, period, and a young woman such as her. And I think having two daughters myself and always understanding that I come from a country of strong women, regardless of whew, how much they have to face, which is like ridiculous and terrible and bad, to give them a sense of agency, even if it's not inspirational, at least it's an escape. It's a world where they can go and live this fantasy of like enjoying, where many young men, young boys get this type of fantasy escape all the time, as well as this sort of backing up, so to speak. And I think that that's, really, really important. So her, and then I also enjoyed writing Weber because I never knew that there actually was, I guess I'll say this in the podcast as a spoiler, but I never knew that Jamaica had James Bonds.
Okay.
And yeah, so in writing, I should also mention I worked with a former station chief of the FBI, and he was awesome. He was amazing in giving me all these inside things I didn't know, including that Jamaica had James Bonds. So that just was like, wow, this character and what they do as a cover is an actual thing for many of them, and that was like huge for me. And then also his purpose. You don't quite know what his purpose is, kind of like, which I enjoyed you saying with Chops. You don't quite know his purpose. Again, you don't quite know Webb.
Mm,
You
mm.
don't quite know his purpose either. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the manipulation of more powerful or more informed forces. And the fact that he got to toy with people, kind of a Nancy like, was, hence Weber. Yeah, so that's just really fun because it really gave me this opportunity to construct the forces that are sort of out there. And when I think of also in my first book, Your Corner Dark, one of the questions I often get is, and I get it in like this dismissive way, Desmond, there's no such thing as a stingray. Well, there actually is a stingray, and it's used quite often. And a stingray is when the police force or any of the authorities create a cell phone tower given the technology they have. And that cell phone tower allows them to take in all the messages in the area. So they can like become, Sprint or Digicel, in a way or a manner of speaking, and pull in all this information. And again, like in Weber in Better Must Come, he has not merely just some technological advances, he has the full advantage because he's part of a multi-jurisdictional task force. And given that he understands who the players are, it really becomes this issue of knowledge is power. And he wields it. And I enjoy him wielding it because it puts so many people in trouble. And then what he says at the end comes from my heart, really. And I guess that's too much of a spoiler if I say what that is. But it really it echoes my belief in some of the issues or key issues that face Jamaica right now.
I read it in a way as my 12, 13-year-old self. If I would picked it up then, I would have really enjoyed it very, very much. And what you say about Deja, as a girl, you identify with that character who's she's taking control. She's doing this fishing thing, and I enjoyed it. So thank you for joining us here. Maybe Jackie, you've got some last questions.
I do. I do.
I thought you would.
Yeah, sorry. I think by that Katrina means that I just talk too much. I always have, have a little question.
No, I don't mean that at all. I just mean you always think up interesting stuff.
So, what is it that you read, and what's your favorite genre?
I read a bit of everything. I read, a lot of young adult. I like Jason Reynolds. I like Courtney Summers. I like Jennifer De Leon in the YA genre. Adult, I like a good amount of nonfiction. I like George Packer and his, it's something I've read recently. He's done a couple takes on the sort of eroding of American society, which I think is, important to read. Um, let's see. Obviously, I like thrillers. I love Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. And again, a thriller where I think he has a cast of 30 and he kills almost all of them by half of the book. So yeah, a lot of thrillers, nonfiction, YA, and like that. But what I really like about this job is that I get to read a ton for research. I do like nonfiction, but like my level of reading nonfiction goes up like crazy. Like I can't show it to you now, but like whenever I'm writing something, I have all these books that are like half open to a page or area just lying down. And my daughter the other day actually came in and she's like, "Yeah, I thought you were an organized person." I'm like, I'm working. I don't have enough book leaves or page holders. And so I just leave them lying down. You go to them to revisit the research from time to time. And, because you get your inspiration from that.
And then following on from that, what is the most
You have more
embarrassing book?
question?
Only a few more. What's the most embarrassing book or film you'd publicly admit to liking?
And I love films. I often find something great about every film. Having been in that world before getting into novel writing, I would go back to Blockbuster back when it existed, and I would just go in and take like a pile of films and stay home and just keep putting in disc after disc. And for me, that's like a great deal of fun. So I I kind of love the idea of like researching film too. And I think again, you find a lot of homage in the film world. Scenes that are taken from, the classics, like the great dancing scene by, I forget the Italian director, but Tarantino redid that with Uma Thurman and Travolta. And it's a direct lift, and he says exactly what he's doing, but it's like these scenes that are just speak to us in a certain way. And so I find so much in almost every film. I think when you read, I don't look at it as embarrassing or not. What I kind of look at it as like is boring or not.
Okay.
And that's the last thing I want to do. And I think Katrina, you pointed out with Better Must Come. If Moses the screenwriter came down from the mount to tell me what is my number one rule, the number one commandment, it would be thou shalt not bore your reader. And I just don't believe in that. That's not what I want to write. So I guess going all the way back to the beginning, do I write for myself? Well, I guess from what I do write for myself, what my rule for writing for myself is to never or try to never be boring.
Mm-hmm.
And Better Must Come will never, I don't think anyone will ever critique it for ever being boring.
It's not, definitely not. So then what are you working on now?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm working on two stories, and I'm really close because I've there's I write all the time. I've stepped away from, the advertising business of being this highly stressed out creative director trying to come up with new ways to sell diapers, insurance, and tires, to being a full-time writer and a full-time dad. And though I miss the money, let me repeat that. Though I miss the money, I have not missed the time I've spent with my family. You hear this thing that athletes go, "Yeah, I'm stepping away from the game to spend more time with my family." And I'd always be suspect about that. Be like, really? You're gonna like not play football and not get the adoration of millions and not get millions and millions of dollars to be with your family? But I get it now. I thought that as a young person, but I get it now. I mean, these moments, especially the car rides with my kids, I get to hear things that you can't hear when, you just ask them, "How you doing? How's school?" "Good." "What'd you do?" "Stuff." "How you feeling?" "Okay." But in the car ride, you get the depth of the thing. So, yeah.
And so, finally, if our listeners wanted to get hold of you, would they be able to find you any of the socials, or is there a website that we can get more information on your books and your publications?
Yes, yes. So where am I? I'm on Instagram as Desmond Hall Author. The website is Desmond Hall Author. The Twitter is Desmond Hall Author.
I see a theme.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Got to stick with the themes. Yeah, and also I'm on there's information on the Simon and Schuster website, so it can be found there too. So yeah, reach out. I'm there. Or really, I'm here writing. And you asked, oh, I didn't answer one question, right? You asked what I'm working on. So I'm venturing into middle grade, and I'm writing a time travel story where an African American brother and sister discover they have powers and are sent back to the Tulsa massacre to save a piano, which they completely rail against the spirits about. Why can't they save the people? But they find out that saving this piano is a great way of preserving generational wealth, which I think is a huge issue that's often not looked at, right? Because there's okay, why do you act this way? Why do those people act this way? Or it's often said by a certain ilk. And when you trace the lack or the destruction, the purposeful destruction of generational wealth, you kind of like look under the covers a bit, under the hood of the car, and you see the engine and the works. So again, it's a thriller, so it's going to be exciting. But again, you begin to see, continuing with the theme, I'm going to make it exciting, but if you look underneath, you're going to see what's going on. Plus, again, with kids, you can't like knock them on the head and tell them something. It's almost a sure way to get them to not pay attention, right? So you excite them, thrill, get the game going, and then make them stop a minute, if they will, and go, wait a minute, there's something else.
Well, I'm hoping that you will come back and actually talk to us about it.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think you're going to have to give me a trip to London to do it.
You know what? I think you should speak to Alex. He can arrange that.
Okay, I'm going to call Alex right away.
In fact,
He's
it'd be
great.
It'd be nice for you to actually join us at the book club, where then there'll be a lot more members. And then, yeah,
Oh,
you have
wow.
more people throwing questions at you.
Oh, can't wait. Yeah, and I have to thank Alex for setting this all up too. He's amazing. I wish every writer had him as a publicist.
He's been great. Well, it really now just leaves me time to say thank you so much for sparing the time to join us and for the lovely, interesting conversation that we've had.
Well, thank you. Thank you both.
And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please like, share, or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, goodbye.